The San Jose Sharks are considered one of the big winners from the 2025 NHL Draft. They also have a lot of cap space heading into free agency. J.D. Young breaks down a very impressive offseason so far in San Jose. All that and more next on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Sharks, J.D. Young. And J.D., you've got to be pleased with the Sharks draft. It was one of the highest rated drafts by almost every expert panel. What stood out to you about the way the Sharks handled this draft?
Mike Grier, he went for upside. This was definitely a draft where maybe you thought he might go a little bit more kind of meat and potatoes to try to fill some needs or fill some holes, especially at right-handed defense in the pipeline. But Grier swung for upside. Of course, you start with Michael Misa, who was pick number 2, considered the best forward in the draft. Might be considered a Celebrini type of clone in the style that he plays, that full 200-foot game, but also just his style and his skill in the offensive zone, but then the details in the defensive zone, as we saw Celebrini, very impressive season his first season in the NHL. They followed up by getting Joshua Ravensbergen, considered the best goalie in the class, even though you have Askarov, who's considered to be your long-term starter and should be the Sharks starter opening night this season. But he thought the opportunity to continue to add to the pipeline there just too good to pass up. Getting a guy like Simon Wang in the second round, who very raw prospect, but 6 foot, almost 6'7", 230 pounds, and one of the best skaters in the class. If he hits, it feels like it could be a potential massive win there. So this class, I think, was marked by just swinging for upside and maybe not playing it safe with some of the picks. There could have been some potential options there, but I feel like Grier knows exactly how he wants to build this team, and he has been doing that the last couple seasons. And I think we saw it again this year.
As far as Michael Misa is concerned, where do you see him? How far off is he from the NHL? Is there a chance he plays this year? And if not, what do you see him doing?
Yeah, that's a big question with Misa, right? Is, a lot of these other top prospects are already kind of committed to going to schools. Misa, who I think is clearly too good to be going back to the OHL next year after putting up 62 goals and 134 points in 65 games. I think the Sharks are going to give him every opportunity to play in the NHL next year, whether they maybe follow the Will Smith, kind of road of, being very careful the first half of the season. Maybe you're giving him development days. Maybe he's not playing in back-to-back games. Then kind of the second half of the season, as he gets more accustomed to playing NHL life, you take the training wheels off and let him go. And Will Smith had a very successful second half of the season. And I think for Misa, you could potentially do that as well. Or if they don't, if they feel like he's not ready, maybe you send him to college, keep him from signing a ZLC until literally the last possible minute that you can. That way he can have the option to go into college. And you look at, I think any school in the nation would be happy to grab Michael Misa. His brother Luke Misa is going to be going to Penn State this year, so there's maybe an opportunity to go there, play with his brother. There's rumors Gavin McKenna, who's supposed to be the 2026 top pick in the draft, is potentially looking at Penn State as well. Mike Grier, he loves those Boston schools, so I'm sure he'd be happy to push Misa that way. Those schools always have top end prospects. So I think it's the Sharks are going to do what they think is right for Misa. But I would assume it's either the NHL or NCAA would be my two guesses for Misa next year.
As far as sleepers are concerned in this draft, maybe a pick not in the first round that you really think has some potential.
I'm going to go with Simon Wang, who I did mention earlier. Like I said, big boy, kind of got to hockey a little bit later. The highest born Chinese player. Didn't put up amazing production in the OHL, but again, that raw prospect for him. Great one. First of all, great story. It just kind of, being a Chinese immigrant going over to Canada at the age of 14 and really falling in love with hockey, and kind of wasn't until that time when he really got into hockey, kind of full time. But first of all, the way he kind of carries himself, and he knows that this pick is so huge for Chinese hockey. But one of the first things he said is, I want someone to break my record. I want someone to be drafted in the first round. I want a Chinese player to be drafted in the top 10. Like, he knows how important his work is. And he's already talked about post hockey kind of going and helping to grow the game in China. But again, for someone that size, right, 6'6", 6'7", 230 pounds, and the way he skates, and probably going to be more of a shutdown defensive type of defenseman, probably not much offensive production. But if he hits, you're looking at an absolute monster on the blue line to go with Sam Dickinson, who the Sharks drafted last year, 11th overall. You look at like Muka Madulin and some of the other picks. That is just a big blue line for the Sharks. I also do want to shout out Cole McKinney, who the Sharks drafted later in the second round. I actually was kind of projected to be maybe a late first, early second, but McKinney, very good defensively as a center, great in the penalty kill. I think one of those kind of jack of all trade type of players, projects to be a really solid third line and center. And if you have, Celebrini, Misa kind of doing a little bit more offensive stuff and having that kind of shutdown type of player like McKinney, I think McKinney has a pretty good shot to be an NHL player as well.
Free agency coming up this week. The Sharks have a lot of money to spend, maybe the most.
All the money, Gil.
Yeah. So what is the plan for Greer in free agency? Any targets? And how much money do they have to spend to get to the floor even?
So the Sharks currently have $44 million in cap space right now. Projection, you're going to have to spend about 20 to 25 to safely get to the floor. So I do expect Greer to kind of, he did say, like, we want to make this roster better. Expect him to target the blue line, but he also doesn't want to give out massive 6 or 7 year contracts, especially with the prospects coming in. So I think Greer is going to try to maybe more of a lot of the middle class of free agency to try to kind of bolster up this team, right? Give some more support to the forwards and guys like Celebrini and Will Smith, right? Maybe try to find a guy who can help Will Smith along on the second line, as Will Smith is projected to kind of at least be the 2C this year. But if Smith doesn't work out, I think having a backup plan for in case Smith isn't quite ready to be the 2C, they're there. But I expect them to go after, try to find the bolster up this defense. They're also going to need to find a backup goalie behind Askarov. There are a lot of holes. There's plenty of ways to spend the money. I'm just curious to see how Greer does it, because again, that's a lot of money. And Greer said he doesn't want to give out 6 or 7 year long deals. So I am curious to see how he's able to kind of navigate that. But like I said, I would expect a couple defensemen, as somebody who can carry the puck or at least get the transition moving, because that's been a huge issue for the San Jose. Maybe Bowen Byram. I've heard that they're interested in Bowen Byram from the Sabres, but we know the Sabres kind of want to make more of a hockey deal, and the Sharks don't really have a ton of guys I think they're willing to give up on on the roster right now. Like maybe a guy like Mario Ferraro or something like that as a centerpiece but you still have to probably give up some futures. I think that's where the Sharks have their most of their kind of assets is in futures right now. So
do you think they might acquire some quote unquote bad contract veterans as a stopgap?
Talking to Greer last week, he said that's not kind of plan A. I think that for them, they want to try to, again, he wants to try to get the roster better. And I know you're trying to ship off some of your Isles contracts to me, Gil, but I think that's kind of more of a plan B. And if they get to August and they realize hey, we really need to maybe bring on a bad contract here and take back an asset, that might be something that they look to do. But I think for Greer right now, he wants this roster to take a step this year, right? And with Celebrini and Smith entering year 2, with Eklund in in year 3. And with Askarov in that, I think there's legitimate reason for the Sharks to try to make like an Anaheim Ducks type jump, where just be competitive for a good chunk of the season, maybe not in the playoff hunt, but just be a more competitive team this year. And I think that's the plan for Greer.
All right, JD, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Of course, you can listen wherever you're listening to this podcast. Just search for Locked On Sharks. You can find us on YouTube as well on Locked On Sharks. You can find the show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Locked On Sharks. Find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at MyFryhole.
All right, JD, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to get started today.